on now to the last speaker of the morning, which is Michiel van der Voort, Executive Director at the International Software Quality Institute. Michiel was previously a former member of the SFIA board. His main areas of interest is professional development in IT in a global business-orientated context, and we've had quite a few examples this morning of not being quite as insular as we have been in the past about the UK. He was BCS's director for this area until 2012, and he is now responsible for business development at the International Software Quality Institute in Germany. And he lives in Amsterdam. So I think we've gone, as a geography test this morning, we've had quite a few countries. So please welcome Michiel to talk about learning and certification, keeping up with the changes.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm keeping you from lunch, but I hope to inspire you with some examples of use of SFIA. Some you may recognize, and I hope that there's some at the end which will maybe surprise you or be ideas about how you could use SFIA. A bit about software quality, that's the Institute's area of work. We all know, and it was mentioned this morning, how we rely on data, on availability, and how we rely in that sense on IT and software to make our lives the way they are today, and social media included. On the other hand, we can't wait with development. System development would, if it would take a year or 1.5 years, it's far too long. Just think about what happened to the manufacturer of BlackBerry. From leading the business market, they ended up to be a niche product because it took them too long to develop new concepts. So things need to be done fast, quicker, agile, and at the heart of it is always the software quality. So it's a pleasure to work for the Software Quality Institute. We're mainly focused, like I said, on software testing, agile testing, requirements engineering. It's a niche area, but of major importance in various countries. Good. Let's talk about SFIA. One of the things I'm interested in is in mapping. Later on we talk more about services. We are all familiar with the framework. Actually, a framework is a simple concept. You take 2 dimensions and you open Word and you create a table, and then you can start building your framework. That's actually all you need to do. So the concept of SFIA is not complex. It is, of course, the value of what you put in the cells. That makes what the framework is its real value. And I think the fact that we have now version 5 of the framework, and with all the great examples today, has shown that the quality is really there with SFIA. The other thing is that a framework is a sort of representation of reality. It's a model. There are many IT people out there with a variety of skills. We all know that. But you can't understand what they all do in all these roles and all these skills. So we need a framework, sort of a grid, to understand what they actually do. It's like with a project, you introduce phases and documents and stages in order to help you work through your project. Otherwise, you would get lost. So the obvious thing to map on a framework is, of course, the individual. And I will show you a number of examples of how you can map an individual on the framework and the skills of that individual. This is an interesting one, and I will show you a variety of examples from the University of Plymouth. And it is very much about helping students understand what IT is actually about. So what kind of skills are there? And what do you currently have? And what would you like to have? If you think about, that was already mentioned, the Grand Coalition, as it's been launched on Monday by the European Commission, is very much about a skills gap, because young people do not understand what IT is about. Well, you could use SFIA to explain what SFIA is actually about and what IT is about. Another thing you could map on SFIA is of certificates, and there's later on this afternoon a presentation by APMG on how to map certificates onto the framework. And that's already a tricky one, because there you will see that the skills are not the building blocks for certificates. And the same would go, of course, this is APMG, but if you would look at a course, and this mapping is done by QA, it's presented last year at an event from Open University and the SFIA Foundation, you will see that the elements of the framework are not the skills of the individual. That's why when you send someone to a training to improve the skills, you immediately encounter this issue, that the two not really link together very well. And it's also interesting to see that if you start mapping, and if you start mapping with a certificate, you will just look at the syllabus, the exam requirements, and you come up with the mapping. But if you do that with the training, you take a slightly different approach. You will much more think about the audience you have. People who generally attend an ITIL foundation training, for instance, or software testing foundation training. And then you end up with a different mapping. And that's why you would see, if you compare the two, that in general, the mappings between what the training provider would do and what the certification body will do are very different. Another way of using SFIA is much more using it as a way to build something and go back again. And I've known, this is an example of another university, sorry, there we go, from Northampton. There's also an example from Open University where when they start building a new course, they will not just bring the people together who have this brilliant idea about a new course, but they will use SFIA to set up sort of the boundaries of what they're going to build. Also allowing for a new course that is very much linked already to existing ones, but is also very clearly defined in terms of SFIA. It saves them time and budget, and especially the fact that they can deliver much quicker because they start looking at the sort of boundaries and the requirements in terms of SFIA at the beginning, saves them a lot of time. And you could do the same thing, of course, when you build a certificate. Jobs and roles was already mentioned before. This is again the Open University, where they used an approach from the SFIA Foundation to explain again how courses link to job roles, because that is in the end what it is about. And we'll get an example like this. The test manager, I'm obviously interested in that, and how you would approach and use SFIA to get it in there. So you would see a reference with the core skills, additional skills, etc. This works really well, and this is about the mapping, the linking, the using of SFIA. But I thought, well, maybe we can go a bit further. When working for BCS as the director also for this area, I encountered, of course, SFIA Plus, and SFIA Plus is such a powerful tool because you can do much more. You can really make a link to corporates, to HR policy, to recruitment. So there's so much richness in SFIA Plus. So my thinking was, can we do a bit more than just a static mapping and just using SFIA? Can we create a surface? And one of the things already mentioned is assessments. There are lots of assessments out there. I find this an assessment. Anyone recognize it? Where it's from? It's LinkedIn. This is people in my network, by the way, who say this about me. I don't know why they say it, but actually that's what they say. There's one person, if you notice carefully, the yellow one with the blue hat is in all four, so I'm not sure if that counts as relevant, but anyway. This is what, sorry? Good, thank you. So what's happened here is that people come up with their thoughts and give interesting feedback. So assessments could be a variety, and we talked about self-assessment, about tools, and I have one later on again about how it could help. This is a very simple one, of course, where you could say as a self-assessment, how do I score on SFIA? This is another assessment, and we touched upon it briefly. This was something built in, I think, 2002 in the Netherlands, where there was an initiative of a few major corporates thinking about a framework. And actually what they did, they combined two. That's why they called it frameworks. And it works, by the way. That's the second funny part of it. So what they did, they built a sort of SFIA-like structure with 4 levels. And they talked to a company called P-Media in the Netherlands, and they are very well known, at least in the Netherlands, for their skills assessment, behavioral skills, personal skills, soft skills, that kind of skill. They got lots of interviews. They do electronic tests like we just saw, and they put it all in an impressive database, and then they build online tests for that. And we thought it was extremely interesting because then we could combine the two in frameworks. So this is an example of a public framework with also not only the IT skills, but also the soft skills, allowing you to look at the bigger picture of the person. This is a different approach, and it sort of links to the earlier presentation we just saw. What happened here is a study done by Simon Roller of ADAPS in Australia. It's a recruitment organization, and they went into an organization and to start looking at the various roles people have and what the salaries are. And could they understand what was happening in that organization? In the beginning, they couldn't. until they introduced SFIA and started doing the following. What they did, they assessed the people in various rows, and the one on the, from your, I'm always better at that, left side, I think, yes, it's the senior application program, I don't know what it is. They took that row and defined it in terms of SFIA skills. And they also interviewed the people in that row and tried to understand the difference in how many skills were actually required according to the row and how many skills the people in that row actually provided to that row. They have a sort of method behind it with a calculation of a level of skills and how that would count, and then they divide it by the salary. That's the whole story. But the interesting part of it is for them knowing what the average salary for that role would be, they could then calculate actually what the missing part is. So they found lots of people, like the first one you see the salary is around 150,000 US dollars in this case, but that person only brings something like 60% of the actual skills to that role. So they could define the skills gap, but also in terms of money. And there are lots of reasons why that could happen. The other interesting bit they found, and there's more in that white paper, is the difference. There doesn't seem to be any alignment. So maybe it's part of a result of ongoing reorganizations and internal transfer of people. So they apply for a job and they come in another job, and in the end, there's hardly any relation anymore between what they actually provide to the organization and what the organization gives. Interesting approach where you, like I said, see a number of things, and this helped them calculate sort of what you have in an organization and helps you understand what the skills gap actually is, because it's easy to talk about the skills gap, or we don't have the skills in this organization, or we need much more, like we said this morning, architects or project managers. But actually, there is a way of calculating. And again, it's SFIA that helps you do this. I thought it was quite a nice way of, when we talk about skills gap, how you actually do that. Talking about skills gap, this is the career advice tool. It's been nicely funded by the European Commission. It's the DG Enterprise and Industry, one of the four involved in this grand coalition. They thought about a landscape. So put this idea of SFIA away for a bit and think about a landscape where you have various people, and don't think about buildings and trees and what have you, but about people and jobs. So you have a landscape of jobs. And the question is now, can you calculate where you are in this landscape? So the tool, I think, unfortunately, they use a different skills profile system, and I'm not sure if I can announce the name, but it's the European Competency Framework. That's what they use to build this tool. So what you do as an individual, you enter your current job role that's linked to a standardized European job role. You add information on what you've done, what kind of certificates, etc., etc. And then this machinery, this tool, online calculates where you are actually, but also what's nearby. What roles are nearby, where you are, where you sit in this landscape. And it suggests a way to get there. And this is the thinking of the European Commission. There is a skills gap, but just saying that there's a skills gap is not sufficient. You must explain to people how they can get to another position. Using, like I said, a similar system, unfortunately not SFIA, but this is crucial to the approach where they want, because it's about demand and supply in IT, of course, where you want to bridge demand and supply. A recent study from Empirica, again commissioned, paid by the Commission, showed an increasing skills gap, but it doesn't really quantify what that gap is in what roles or what people actually need to do in order to bridge that gap. That's missing. And this career advice tool should work. This is another one, similar area, again, using the European Competency Framework. This is Pink Elephant, also based in the UK, with that tool, Pink Skill, not only to help people understand what kind of training they should do with Pink Elephant, but also how they should develop as an individual and what other training they should do in order to develop their skills. It's interesting, part of it is that it's broader than just Pink Elephant's offering. The last one I want to share with you is an idea. I'm not really sure if it's a good idea, actually. It's the plan to create a register. We all think in terms of certification on its own, so in security or Microsoft or Cisco. This register has a different purpose. Actually, it's the idea that, like we did, showed you a few examples of assessment, how not do a more formalized assessment? Let's assume that we can do a formalized assessment which is really credible and reliable and which, if repeated, would show the same outcome. If you would do that, you could start building a register, not so much of saying this person has the ITIL Foundation certificate or this person works on level 4 of the framework. No, this register would show you as a picture compared to the framework who you are and where you are. And you can debate how long is that relevant, when should it expire, what's the business model for this, should this register be online and available to everybody or should it be visible to a smaller group anyway. This is being developed, and the idea is that it is aimed at opening and making sure much better what IT people can do and how you as a future employer or a colleague can see what someone can do. It's an assessment, but formalized, and if it works, then it should be a credible way of showing what people can do. Good. All these examples, and I've looked at a few more, led me to a few conclusions, and I'm happy to disagree with you, but this is my sort of limited observation so far. We talked a lot about the skills for IT in terms of IT skills, but I think we should take a broader approach and also include the behavioral skills, the soft skills, these areas, and not leave it to others to do that, but maybe bring them in the framework or close to the framework or allow for a vision how other skills frameworks in the area of soft skills would link to the framework. That's one. The other one may be in contradiction to what some of us in this room do. It is, of course, great to think about certification in a certain method of product. And the #1 certification provider worldwide is Microsoft, and then you have Cisco, and even Apple is doing great business with its certification right now. It's all method or product related. But shouldn't we move away from that and think more holistic about the individual? Because actually that's why we started with SFIA, to get an understanding of the skills of the individual. And the last one, and that's maybe a bit, shouldn't say that as a former member of the SFIA board, but shouldn't we move away a bit from the focus on the framework to think from the foundation point of view, from the SFIA framework point of view, about the services? People in the room presented services they create on the framework, but shouldn't there be more sort of attention, not just on the framework, but also on the development of these services? Because partly there are others in the world outside who are very active and creative in developing services around other frameworks, which could be and will have a similar position. That's it from my side, so I'm not keeping you from lunch too long. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'm of course happy to take them.
Any questions for Michiel? Sweet round, no questions. So Michiel, thank you very much. I'm sorry, one here. Sorry, if you could wait for the microphone, please, otherwise I'm in trouble.
If I compare the levels, you in your presentation said you have to integrate the behavioral skills with the professional skills. But you showed us 4 levels in the model for the behavioral skills. I think SFIA recognized 7 levels? Yeah, 7 levels. So how do you do the mapping? Is your level 2 the same as a level 2 in SFIA?
The thought by then for the Dutch framework, which I showed you part of, was that also the IT skills were on 4 levels. I think that's fairly arbitrary if you do it on 4 or 6 rows. I think the key thing is that there are frameworks out there also for behavioral skills, and there are organizations testing against it. So if it's 4 on this side or 6 on the other side, the fact that they come together and you need them together because that in the end determines the individual and their skills and their capabilities. So in the Dutch circumstance, we're very practical. We just thought, well, if they use 4, we'll link it to 4 others. But I could imagine that you explore this in more detail. There are also organizations which have a more elaborated framework for the soft skills.
Any other questions? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So as we come towards the end of this morning, just a couple of points that I'd like to make on what Michiel said. again, we're seeing this emphasis of moving from just these kind of bland technical skills that we've got in SFIA to interpreting them that's something that's meaningful for the workplace, for the individual. And just picking up on something you said towards the end, that maybe SFIA and the foundation should look moving more towards services. Certainly from my perspective, and I hope Ron supports this, the intent always was that SFIA would provide that base language, and for its long-term health and success, we needed other organizations, we needed other companies to start to build the services and the tools around it. And there are two really important reasons for that. One is, I think, that it gives the long-term health and success of SFIA and stops it becoming very inward-focusing and building a tool set that no one uses. If people are building a business around SFIA, it means that there is opportunity, availability, and it forces SFIA to become very focused on staying relevant to the marketplace, because if we don't do that, SFIA will not evolve in the right way. It will not remain simple. So while I actually support the need to drive in services, I'd like to see SFIA working much more with other companies, and we've seen quite a few of them this morning, that really bring SFIA alive and take it from being a common language and use that language to deliver real business value. So it's really interesting. When I was looking at one of the brochures that you've got here, working with SFIA 5, maybe in my head, the better wording would be working underpinned by SFIA 5. It really is that common language. It's how you use it, how you interpret it, how you add real value to businesses that makes SFIA so valuable to us all, which is why the foundation will make sure that it stays current, it stays accurate. The whole range of companies that we are seeing here, the examples that we've had from Deutsche Post and others, of taking that, trimming it down, using 4 skills here, using 6 skills there, is a perfect example of taking that language and adding real value to the business.